Go ahead.
Okay, so I'm wondering if we can jump into section 19 on chapter 3 today and continue with sex of the planets.
Yeah. Sounds good.
Yes. Okay.
I just want to, last week,
Yes.
we did the colors, right?
Yes, the appearance of the
Right, the appearance of
complexion.
the that was very interesting because that video got tons of views.
It did.
Yeah, and so people are apparently interested in how they look.
Yes.
But also I think it got tons of views because it's slightly controversial in some way, maybe the issue of race and stuff like that.
Yes.
So the thing is, what they're talking about in that verse is Varna, right? That's the Sanskrit word for it, is Varna. It's not just a color, it really is a race. Varna really means your outward appearance, but it also means your outward function.
Okay.
And like, for example, the classical way of referring to the social system is called the Varna system.
Okay. That's the caste system? The Varna?
The caste system is what it becomes historically after some centuries.
Okay.
But it's not initially a caste system. A caste system is jati based. It means it's based on your birth. But the Varna system is karma based. It's based on your actions.
Okay.
So it's not like we're just pulling this out of thin air that we make this relate to races, because these are actually the complexions or the outward appearance, the outward function of the planet. The other thing I wanted to say is it's very similar to today's thing that we want to cover today, about the gender of the planets.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of difficulty because the world has suffered a lot of racism and sexism. And then on the other hand, there's a lot of PC, like over insulation against, against that trauma. The world is really messed up. There's people that hate each other and look for any excuse to hate each other. And so that's why you have racism, sexism, and all that kind of junk. But then you have the people that just want to try to defend against it, but they lose sight of reality too.
Yes.
Yeah, so we can't really lose sight of reality. So let's describe what racism and sexism really is.
Mm-hmm.
Really, these are like a discrimination or a judgment of superiority. Really, racism or sexism is a judgment of superiority or inferiority based on the fact that you either belong or don't belong to a particular race or gender, right?
Yes.
And it's going to, one of the things that it does is generalize that, well, you're in this class, you're in this race, or you're in this gender, so you're just like everybody else that's in that gender. That's one thing that it does, is generalize, but that's not the only thing that it does. It also stigmatizes or elevates. It says, you're in this class and therefore you suck, or you're in this class and therefore you're the best. That's what they really do. So it's not that if you just say, hey, men and women are different, that you're being sexist, right? If you say men and women are different and women are stupid and useless, that's sexist. Yes. Or if you say women are stupid, men are smart, that's sexist. Yes. You're pointing on a difference between the things and saying that one is therefore better, and you're also neglecting to understand individuals within the categories. Mm-hmm. Same thing with racism. If you say, well, if you say African people are different than Asian people, that's not racist. That's an observation. But the first point is that not every Asian person is the same exact Asian person. Not every African person is the same exact African person, right? That's one thing that you have to realize. Just not every woman is the same exact amount of femininity, right? Yes. Not every man is the same amount of masculinity. Not every member of a race has that same characteristics of the race, but there'll be more, astrologically speaking, they'll be more attuned to the planet that's aligned with their race. That's all. If they're born at a particular time when that becomes really accentuated, then they really typify their race.
Yes.
If they're born at a time when that planet is in an unusual situation, then they really are atypical for their race. Yeah. And if you say Africans are different than Asians and therefore we can enslave Africans, that's racism. Mm. Right? because you're saying, therefore, you say these people are worse than the other people, are inferior to the other people. But that's not what we're doing here.
Yes.
In fact, we're not even really trying to examine race issues or gender issues. We're trying to learn about astrology, right? But it is interesting how it brings up the race issues and the gender issues.
Yes.
So what we're trying to really understand is, well, Mercury has this quality. It's the same kind of quality that's typified in the stereotypical Asian quality.
Yes.
Yeah. It's okay to be stereotypical because you're dealing with symbols, not realities. You know what I'm saying?
Yes, that was because for me, coming from an anthropology background, we'll even say race is a construct, you know, that it's not, yes, your complexion, that biological difference is there, but that other connotation and underlying things that go behind that, there's social constructs of creating these hierarchies, like the way you're saying right now. But when I started, I had a bit of a difficulty putting that aside and understanding and differentiating that. To understand the symbolism, you have to understand the simplicity of how it works to understand its complexity.
Yeah, right.
So,
That's a very good point. You really
yeah,
do
and
have to understand the simplicity of the thing. That these are actually
yeah,
very simplified stereotyped symbols that you work with. Keep it that way, because when you start mixing these things together, it's going to get complicated so freaking fast. That if you make your basic symbols complicated, it's hopeless for you to do this.
yes.
Realize that these symbols are basic, black and white, or a couple of colors,
Yes.
and they're extreme symbols on purpose, because the sophistication and the nuance comes in how you mix them. Yeah.
Right. Yes. And so much comes into it. It does get really complex. So it helped me to start kind of just think about the symbols as the symbols. It is black and white, but it's going to get really complex really fast.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So it's like a color or a sound. I mean, it's like, you know, if you just play a C on a piano, it makes a certain pitch. But if you if you just play a G, it makes another pitch. But if you play the C and the G together, it's a whole different thing. Right.
Yes.
So, or it's the same thing with colors. If you have red, that's a certain thing. If you have yellow, that's another thing. But if you mix red and yellow together, it changes both of them. Now they become this new thing that's orange. So it's not like you have to put every single, you know, like the crayon. Well, crayons are different because wax doesn't mix, but with paint, with the color that mixes, you know, real artists, they don't need like 75,000 tubes of paints. They have like 3 or 5, 6 tubes of paints, and then they mix it on their board.
Yes.
It's the same thing with astrology. The symbols themselves are exaggerated, are stereotyped, are extreme. Don't worry about that. It's not PC. It's not right. It's not out of touch with the way we now think about the world. Because you're just looking at the building blocks of the reality. The reality isn't how these planets combine with each other. That's what represents reality. But when you learn about a planet in isolation from each other, you're learning about the building blocks of reality.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yes, it does. I agree. Absolutely.
Anthropology.
Yes, I agree.
All right. So yeah. So let's keep that in mind now. We're going to deal with male and female. Right.
Yes.
That it's actually every man has female planets in their chart. Every woman has male planets in their chart. So we're talking about some kind of theoretical masculinity and femininity when we talk about it in its pure rarefied form. And so if it seems like it's highly exaggerated or highly extreme, that's right, it is.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. What should we do?
Should I read the quote, and then I do have a couple of questions?
Yeah, let's read. Go ahead.
Yes.
Yeah.
Do you want to read it, or should I read it?
Why don't you read it? Because I just use my voice a lot. Let's hear your voice for a while.
Okay, so this is chapter 3, section 19, and the sex of the planets. It says, O Brahman, Mercury and Saturn, these two are neuters, the moon and Venus are female, and the remaining 3, Sun, Mars, and Jupiter are males. And basically that's it, and the rest of it is a commentary, right?
Yeah, that's it.
Yes.
What kind of questions do you have?
Okay, so I wanted to see from the get-go, because Talking about the sex of the planet, and just as an extension of what you were just saying right now, do we need to make a distinction between sex and gender from the get-go? Because sex is something biological, I'm assuming, and gender is more culturally constructed, the division of labor between male and female. Do we take all of these things into consideration?
Yeah, well, the cultural stuff is going to be different from culture to culture.
Yes.
Right? In our cultures, like India or Persia, I'll be walking around with eyeliner on.
Yes.
Nobody's going to think it's weird.
No.
But if you do that in like Minnesota, people will be like hitting you with an iron club.
Yeah.
Right? So, you know, the specific instantiation of the gender norms is always specific to various cultures. But the basic essence of what a gender is actually not a cultural construct.
Okay.
It's a dynamic of how consciousness works. Consciousness works in an outgoing and an incoming manner, right? Consciousness works by perceiving things and exerting will. And that's the fundamental basis of Prakriti and Purusha, which is the basic terminology for male and female. Yeah, the incoming consciousness, the perceptiveness is feminine. That's the root of what femininity is this incoming thing. It's taking things in. And the outgoing thing, the will going out, how consciousness can perceive things, and then consciousness can exert will. The exertion of that will is the basis of the Purusha element, the basis of the masculine element. Now, if you want to separate sex and gender, like the biological gender from the emotional gender, that's fine. You can do that. It's like separating the nakshatras and the rashis.
Okay.
Yeah, you can separate them, but you got to know that they have a relationship to each other. They're not identical, but they have a relationship to each other.
Okay.
So, like for example, with the nakshatras, Ashwini isn't in the beginning of Aries anymore, but it's still somewhere. There's still a relationship between the nakshatra and the rashi. So there's a relationship between the psychological gender and the physical gender. Now, the consciousness itself has a gender, but it's quite fluid because it can function in any role. You see, the soul, the conscious, the core of who we are, functions in both a male and a female role because it's constantly taking in and giving out. It's taking in perceptions and giving out will. And then it just depends on, it's very much like a environmental thing. If you put a magnet next to this thing, it turns this thing this way, right? If a certain kind of magnet is next to this kind of iron, it turns that iron around this way. But if you put it different, if you put this magnet in a different way, that other magnet moves that way. Is that?
Yes.
You can imagine what I'm saying. So the masculine femininity of consciousness is like that. When you're in the presence of a conscious entity who's exhibiting a masculine nature, you'll flip and be feminine. Right. Unless there's going to be a clash, unless you're messed up and you don't know how to partner, you'll flip and be feminine. Or if you're in the presence of an entity that's exhibiting the feminine polarity, you'll flip and be masculine. In the consciousness, at the very deepest level of who we are, it was very fluid down there. But at the ultimate level, you have Bhagwan Sri Krishna, who's exhibiting this primarily masculine nature, and so all the conscious entities flip so that their feminine pole is showing.
I see.
That's why you always see Krishna surrounded by gopis.
Mm-hmm.
That's why you always see Krishna surrounded by women, because the masculinity in him is so compelling that it flips everything around. It flips it orients everyone's consciousness to be feminine in relation to him. So the real core of the feminine and masculine thing is that we have both. That's also why you'll see Shiva is always represented in a Nari, that he's both. He's half and half. He's androgynous. So consciousness itself has both, can act in either role, and it's very interesting. It acts in both roles simultaneously. It's very, very, very interesting. So anyway,
within one expression,
like, because it's all magnetic.
right.
So like if you put this certain magnet in front, then, I mean, for example, if you go into the Krishna Lila, and if Krishna wants to exhibit a masculine shape and be like the cool guy, which he likes to do, then he'll flip that way, and we'll flip, boom, to receive it. But maybe he might want to have like playmates or friends or something. So you can flip a different polarity, and then the same soul can just flip. And then you might see Krishna surrounded by boys.
Okay.
And they might be herding cows and eating sweets and having a picnic or something. So you see Krishna in different situations. Everything's fluid with consciousness. It responds when it's pure consciousness without a physical shackle on it. Then anything that it wants to happen can happen right away.
Okay.
With us, because we got karma and the momentum going, our external shape has this momentum to it. We can't just stop on a dime and turn it to be whatever we want it to be. We have to wait and continue exerting effort. Continue exerting will to get the things to change. But the first thing that can change is your mind, and then it takes even slower to get the more external thing, the body, to change.
Right. Okay.
So, but that's how the gender also works. Like the very, very deepest gender is quite fluid, but then it's oriented in a certain way. In this lifetime, it sets up the mental gender to have a disposition that's much more persistent. It's not as ironclad as the physical gender, but it's much more persistent. Okay. And the mental gender is basically that, how you think of yourself, whether you're the observer or the observed, whether you're the attractor or the attracted.
Okay.
Right.
Yes. So what's orienting this mental gender?
I don't really know. I think it's very complicated. There's external objects that push and pull the consciousness. Okay. So depending on the object that the person wants, it's a magnetic thing, but instead of being internal towards the inner Paramatma, it's externalized magnetism towards sense objects. So, for example, if men like to look at sexy women, it makes them feel more manly. Women like to look at sexy men, it makes them feel more female. It makes the femme, wow, right? It makes that thing come out. So every object has a gender to it. It's not just biological objects, everything has a certain thing which will orient your consciousness to a certain disposition towards it. Whether you want to be experienced by that object or become a part of that object, or whether you want to be the experiencer of that object and have that object kind of become yours. So most of the external world is oriented to make you feel like a man. That's kind of like the nature of the material external world, is that it's saying like, here I am, and I beautiful, now come and give yourself to me. And so it orients us to have that attitude of, let me do whatever it takes so that I can possess this and enjoy this stuff. So even though we talk about masculine and femininity, actually in all the people that we know,
yes,
you cannot experience a pure female. The only place that you can experience a pure female is in beyond nirvana, in this thing called Vaikuntha or Goloka. That's the only place where you can experience pure femininity. Everybody here has got some amount of masculinity because of the nature of the magnetism of external objects pulls you to be the observer.
Okay.
So we get this mental gender, which is actually primarily masculine. That's why the world becomes more favorable to men. Right. It tends to be a male-oriented world, except in the rare periods of time, like the Sati Yugas and things, where things are really balanced. But as the things go on, it just pulls towards being one that caters to men more, because it's the nature of this external world.
Is that the nature of consciousness being expressed, or that's the nature of the world that's...
It's very interesting. I mean, because what happens is consciousness is going to look at something. It always looks at something. That's what consciousness is. If it looks inward, then it's sucked into that inner world of Krishna and Paramatma and everything. And it generates a basically feminine nature. Okay. The specific may be masculine, feminine, whatever, but the basic thing of looking inward is feminine. If it happens to look outward instead, it gets pulled into non-external objects, right? It gets pulled in towards external objects, and that generates a basically masculine nature. So it's consciousness expressing itself, but it's always in relation to the object that it's observing. If it observes the Atma, then it becomes feminine primarily, and if it observes Prakriti, which is the external stuff,
Right.
which appears to have it appears to be available, then it becomes masculine.
Masculine. Okay. Got it.
Well, this has gone pretty far from astrology, but I think people will be interested in it because this is the basis. You got to understand what's masculine and feminine before you talk about which planet is masculine and feminine, right? So what is masculinity? It's basically that to be the observer, to be the enjoyer, so it's going to be the one that goes out. It's got an adventurous spirit. It's got a hungry spirit. It's got a boldness. It goes out. It wants to get something. It sees something far away. It wants to get it. The feminine nature is pulling things towards her. She's not going out questing after something, but she's pulling things towards her. And like embracing or enwrapping them. It's also, feminine planets tend to be more benefic,
right,
than the masculine planets. The king of the malefics is Mars, and the king of the benefics is Venus, and those are also the most extremely masculine and feminine.
I was just going to ask you, in your book, the keywords that you have, you say Venus is receptivity and Mars is inceptivity,
Good,
right?
thanks for bringing
It's
that up.
receiving, and then inceptivity is moving outward, pushing outward. Right?
That's a good way to encapsulate it in a single word. What's the essence of masculinity? Inceptivity, gets things started, goes out. And what's the essence of femininity? Receptivity, accepts things, brings things in. So then your physical body, like your physical gender, it can't be non-related to your mind. That would be completely opposite to everything we know about reality for the last thousands of years, is that physical things are based on mental things. Your mental state causes physical illness or physical health, for example. Everybody knows that. According to the Vedanta, like your physical body is actually like an expression of your mind. But it's not up to date. That's the thing. Like it's got its slowness. It's more slow. The more thick and heavy and tangible something gets, the slower it moves, the slower it changes. So it's like it's an expression of something, but it's not exactly like up to date. Although you can move it around with muscles, right? So you can show happiness and sadness at the moment. But it's got its bones and things that are just stuck. You're stuck with those for your whole life. But then in your next life, it changes. So it's constantly changing to update, to match what the current state of the mental self is. So like, for example, the physical body of a man has the sexual organ goes out. It's inceptive, just like that's the basic nature of masculine gender, non-physical gender. And the feminine organ comes in. It just matches, the physical shape matches the inner nature.
Okay. Yes.
Make sense?
Yes, it does. Yes. Okay. Should I see if the next question can kind of weave in there?
Yeah, right. So your question was, when we talk about masculinity and femininity, should we
differentiate between the biological and which is sex and gender?
You should realize that not every biological shape perfectly matches the mental shape. Okay. And sometimes it's very complex things. That often, whenever you do any astrology for more than a day, you'll run into like so many complexities that are so difficult to unravel and sort out. Because that's life. And that's people. It's very complex. A person's inner mind is very complex once you get these mixtures of things happening. So you can get a person that's got feminine nature in some ways, masculine nature in other ways. Sometimes the sexual reproductive nature of their inner self doesn't match with some of their other traits that they have internally, and that'll generate like a body that doesn't match its sexual orientation. So you'll get the homosexual nature, right?
You did a video on that one recently, right?
Yeah.
Live ones, yeah, that was good.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, just realize that you can get a male body, but the male body is like the outer shell. It's like the first, it's just telling you about the outer shell, or a female body. The mind inside is much more interesting than the body. It's much more nuanced.
Okay.
So if you really want to see if somebody is masculine or feminine, it's more than just looking at the shape of their body.
Okay.
But it's not unrelated. Like for example, like sexual passion.
Mm-hmm.
I've met women that think that they're very sexually passionate. But to be honest with you, the most sexually passionate woman I've ever met is pretty hot, a little bit above average of the average sexual passion of a man.
Oh, I see. Okay.
It's just the way it is.
Right.
So when you have a male body, it's like it makes you more attuned to Mars. So the body is not exactly the same as your inner gender, but it affects it and it limits it or enhances it. So like you can't find like for example, to find a man that's as sensitive and caring and nurturing as a woman is not impossible to find, but difficult. And when you find that man that's super, super protective and caring and nurturing, they're about as caring and loving and nurturing as slightly above average woman is, right? So the body is your tool. You can use a hammer like a screwdriver, but you can't really do everything that a screwdriver can do with a hammer, or vice versa. You can use a screwdriver like a hammer, but it's not going to be as good of a hammer as a hammer. So really the ideal body to exhibit a feminine existence is a feminine body. Right?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. I understand. So my next question, I think you just answered it, because I wanted to know how the planets in the symbolic way that we understand them, how do they construct in our ideas in the way that we understand masculinity and femininity? But I think you just...
Oh, that's really interesting. How would the planets misunderstand masculinity and femininity? This is interesting.
That's part of it too. Yeah. How do they construct our ideas and misunderstanding of them too?
Wow, that's so interesting. Well, I think Mars and Venus would get him right, because those are the most extreme. Okay. See, this verse is very interesting because, first of all, it's very interesting because it's almost exactly the same as Paladipika, which is probably the best classical astrology book, in my opinion. It's a book written in Sanskrit by the author is named Mantreshwar, which is such a cool name, the master of mantra. Oh. Mantreshwar. And his system for categorizing benefics, malefics, and feminine, masculine planets is super, super, super reasonable. And it's interesting to me that basically this verse from Parashara Horashastra is the same exact one. It's almost exactly the same. So it's good. It means that it's not too radical, because his system is so appealing. What he says is you have 9 planets and 3 genders. Okay. And 3 of each. Okay. This is not what Parashar is saying, what Mantreshwar is. You notice Parashar doesn't mention Rahu and Ketu.
No, he doesn't.
He says you have 7 planets, 3 genders, 2 and 3. 3 men, 2 neuters, 2 women. But Mantreshwar adds Rahu and Ketu in so that you can get 3, 3, 3. Okay. So here Parashar is saying, and Mantreshwar also makes the point that they're not equally masculine or feminine. And he also makes that same point with the malefics and benefics. You can categorize the planets into these 3 planets are malefic, Sun, Saturn, and Mars, but they're not equally malefic, or they're not malefic in the same way. Okay. All right. So it's the same, like Sun is just malefic because he's strict. That's all. That's the malefic part of the Sun just means he's tough. Mm-hmm. He's disciplined. He doesn't let you break rules. Right. But Saturn is more malefic in the sense of being negative, trying to stop you from doing things. And Mars is just really dangerous also on top of all that. So Mars is the most malefic, he says. Right. Yeah, and then he says Venus is the most benefic, Jupiter next, and Mercury the least. Right, so when he talks about the masculine and femininity of planets, Mantreshwar says the most masculine planet is Mars. It's like a pure young man, where the masculinity is just racing out of them. It's just
Sorry, can you hear the crow going crazy outside?
Yeah, I love it.
It's okay.
My friend, I probably know that guy.
Okay.
Yeah. The most feminine planet is Venus.
Yes.
So then the next down from those two are the sun and the moon. The sun is very masculine, but not as fully masculine as Mars.
Right.
Because the sun is more patient. Mars really wants to get things started right now. The sun has more maturity to it, and that's a feminine quality. It's more patient. The moon is very feminine, but not as feminine as Venus, because Venus just wants to be nice to everybody. But the moon, you have to say something nice to her first. She wants some recognition or respect or a compliment some first.
Mm-hmm.
She's not as needy as Venus. She's got more masculinity in the sense that she's as self-confident enough that she's not running after people's attention. Yeah. And then the least in the male and female group, you've got the least male is Jupiter, or you could say this is the unusual member of that gender. There's an unusual member of the feminine one is Rahu, and the unusual member of the masculine one is Jupiter. Jupiter is very intelligent.
Yes.
But that's a feminine quality. Intelligent. Say, why do you say it's a feminine quality? Because I'm a Vedic person, and that's what the Vedas say. Mm-hmm. I can't remember that. There's a verse in the Gita. I think it's the 4th chapter. Maybe it's this 32nd verse, but the Sanskrit is eluding me right now. But he says that Medas and Buddhi are feminine qualities. Krishna says feminine qualities, along with Shri, which is beauty, patience, Kranti, and he gives I think 7 or 9 qualities that are feminine. Okay. So Jupiter is male because he's setting laws. He's making laws. Mm-hmm. Which means like decisiveness and everything is another male quality. It's decisive. Boom, this, that, not that, right? So you'll see that in all 3 male planets. Mars is really decisive, goes that way. It doesn't linger around and go back and forth. It picks a thing and boom, goes for it. And the sun is very decisive too. It says, no, this is what it is. It's not that. And Jupiter is also decisive, because it's saying this is right, this is wrong. These are the rules, these are the morals. Okay. But Jupiter's got so much intellect involved in his decision-making process that he's the least of the males. Okay. He's got the most balanced. And then it's interesting if you flip over to the female side and see what's the unusual female there, it's Rahu. Right. Because Rahu's extroversion. But that's strange because the basic nature of femininity is receptive. Yes. So Rahu is like, this is a lot of a male quality there, which is to show, but what does it want to show? It wants to what is an extroversion really? An extroversion is you want to show what's inside. Mm-hmm. So it's actually, there's a lot of focus on what's inside, and you need people to see it, to experience it, to know it. So you push it out. Right. So, and also Rahu is wild. That's another male quality. Wildness is a male quality. Tameness is a female quality. It's domestic. Females are domestic. Men go out and hunt and gather, and female do the farming. That's how it was when we didn't have any computers or anything else, right? When it would just be based on your biology. What can you do? Right. Well, the men would go out and use their muscles to kill things, and the women would use their brains and how to farm and take care of the kids. Mm-hmm. So it's also weird that Rahu's wild, untamable. Mm-hmm. So the third member of each gender group shows you that even in the raw symbols, they're dealing with complexities. Mm-hmm. Only in Mars and Venus do you see pure, totally stereotyped, totally extreme masculinity and femininity. Mm-hmm. In the sun and the moon, it gets toned down a little bit, and in Jupiter and Rahu, it's actually this is an unusual situation.
Yes. It's like a polarity that's actually a spectrum. So if you look at this side of the pole, it's like, whoa, Mars. On that side of the pole, whoa, Venus.
Right.
But and the way you're saying, they're actually making their transition in a very fluid way along the spectrum.
Right. We could draw a spectrum and put Mars over here, Sun, Jupiter, Rahu, Moon, Venus, to get from masculinity to femininity.
Right.
And then you got the 3 neuters. So it's very interesting that the Vedic culture recognizes that not everybody is a male or a female.
Right.
So that some of them are both or neither, or may go back and forth, right? So bisexuality, homosexuality, transgender, physically transgendered, all that stuff was recognized and accepted and integrated in Vedic culture prior to the invasions of external cultures.
Isn't still till today India with the hijras, for example, they have
Yeah, but that's unusual. Those people go through hell.
unusual. It is. They do.
India is actually quite homophobic.
Okay.
Modern India has a huge influence from Islam and later from the British through Christianity, and it really took a toll.
Yeah. Okay.
So yeah, India is not a comfortable place to be if you're not heterosexual.
Okay.
Of transgender, I'm not so sure about.
Okay.
Because it's more of a history. You can at least say Shiva. You know, you can at least point to Shiva.
Right.
But yeah.
Okay.
I think you would rather be in America. As a third gender, you'd probably rather live in America than in India. Or some cool place like Sweden or something.
More liberal, yeah.
Yeah. So the original Vedic culture, they have, or if you study Kama Sutra, they also have a section they talk about homosexuality also, not as if this is an evil thing, but their commentary on it is very interesting because it's obviously written by a heterosexual, the Kama Sutra, but he mentions homosexuality and he says, yeah, this is another option, but I don't know why you would want, he says like, this is another option in the case that the most desirable situation is not available. Then maybe this one will work. Try this, you know. But he didn't really write it. So the Kama Sutra is not really written for a homosexual audience, but it does mention homosexuality as a part of the culture at the time that wasn't frowned upon. It wasn't like, no, that's bad. You can't do that. Whatever you do, don't do that.
Right.
He didn't say that. And he mentions also that there's physically transgendered people and that they're quite useful in society. They had a really important role because they would be able to do the things that the member of that gender usually couldn't do. Like, for example, when you have princesses and queens and very important women, you want to guard them. So unless you live in a fantasy like with Wonder Woman where you can get women who are like Amazons, you want to have your warriors are men.
Right.
Your guards are men, but that's really problematic because men are lusty. So then you have the men guarding the harem. It's really a dangerous situation. This was the perfect job for the transgendered people in Vedic culture. Was they would train them in military arts, and then put them to take care of the women, to be the guardians of the queen's palace and all that type of stuff, because they could be fully trusted, and vice versa. Some of the transgenders who weren't militarily inclined, they would train them to be artists, and then they could be the teachers for women or men easily. Whereas before, if you're not transgendered, it's like, oh, the woman student is not entirely comfortable with the male teacher, especially for dancing where you have to like touch each other and stuff like that, or arts, you know, it's very close contact. So the third gender was really recognized and integrated. Third gender and also other options of sexuality were acknowledged. If you look at the planet Mercury himself, you'll see that he takes 6 months as a man. He has a partner, but they have 6 months where Mercury is male and the partner is female, Ila, and the other 6 months where they reverse.
Okay.
So that's not exactly a heterosexual relationship, although the thing is that like the heterosexual physicality is very convenient. Heterosexuality is physically convenient. but emotionally it doesn't really work for some people.
Right.
So if you're a god,
Switch.
you can just, you have much more freedom with your physical form. So that's what they do.
Okay.
They play the different roles however they feel like it at the time.
Okay.
All right. So reflecting that nature of Vedic culture, the astrology of the Vedas, or maybe any ancient culture. I think I'm not really that up to date. Oh no, studied on other ancient cultures besides Indian, but I would assume probably I know for sure Greek people
Yes.
were actually pretty much champions of homosexuality, right? So, but the Greek homosexuality is interesting because it's a Mars-based homosexuality.
It's power relations.
Yeah, it's a power-related thing.
Yes.
Whereas other types of homosexuality are a Venus-based homosexuality, where the male feels more feminine. But in the Greek, it's very strange homosexuality where the men were so masculine that they actually didn't like women. And then the women were like left on their own. They went off to their own island, and then they became lesbians. So they had a Lesbos island.
Yes.
Right. So yeah, probably every ancient culture prior to the what did they call it? Monotheistic revolution.
Yes.
Prior to the monotheistic revolution, probably all the world cultures were much more pluralistic. Doesn't it just make sense? When you start reducing your gods to this one unforgiving, has to be this one, then your whole worldview about rules, about life, everything is going to change from being plural to being singular.
Yes.
And they're going to say, no, you have to do it this way. There's no other option for doing it the other way. So actually, that was one of the worst things. And I know that modern people who love, like Hare Krishna, they think that the Hinduism is supposed to be monotheistic, but it's not. It's the worst idea. The worst religious idea to ever emerge is monotheism. The Vedic idea is very, very sophisticated. The Vedic idea is of a simultaneous monopolytheism,
Right.
where there's this one essence, but it's manifest plurally.
Yes.
And
That's a
so,
distinction that's missed a lot of time, and it just seems like scatteredness, but it is being funneled out or in. It's not just all over the place randomness.
right. So people get they have those two misconceptions of Hinduism. Hinduism is difficult to understand because it's so much off on its own. It's developed so thoroughly on its own milieu, and it's so different actually than the way we are today that it's hard to understand Hinduism. But the two most common misconceptions are one, that they have many gods, because that's just seeing the outer plurality of the form, but not the singularity of the essence. And the other is that there's like the opposite, like all those many gods. That's all like silly Hinduism, but the real Hinduism is monotheistic. Well, no, it's not. It's very important to see that there's a oneness that manifests as many. That's the really fundamental, essential message of the Veda. Eko bahu syat. Eko, one, bahu, many, syat, should be. One should be many. So they exhibit, and as far as gender goes, they accept more than just the stereotypical male, Mars, and the stereotypical female, Venus. And then they have 3 planets, Mercury, Saturn, and Ketu, for being in the middle, or being a border, or being difficult to determine. Right. So Ketu is pretty interesting. Did you want to ask a question?
I had some question about the nodes in terms of themselves and their sexual or sex orientation, as well as when they interact, let's say Ketu, who's neutered, with hyper masculine like Mars or hyper feminine like Venus. How should we play with these symbols?
When they get together.
Yeah, but that was later in my questions.
Well, that's good. It's interesting now. How do you mix the things together? You could probably now guess, like, that's why if you put Venus and Mars together, if they have a conjunction of Venus and Mars, it's spicy, it's hot, it's intense, because the most feminine element is coming with the most masculine element. So it's actually kind of precarious. symbolically precarious. This could be a fantastic combination or a terrible combination. It's not going to be a mild combination. You know, and then the nature of the two planets, because they're so different, makes it hard for them both to be in good dignity at the same time.
Right.
Yeah, so like, for example, you might put Venus in Libra, but then that means Mars is in Libra. Mars doesn't really work so well there. The dignity gets lower, but Venus is doing great. So it would be great if you could have them both somehow, maybe by their amshas or something, they both have a really good dignity. They're both together. Then it's like a person that's very passionate. They're very sexual and passionate, and it's a wonderful thing for them. And creative, and they really are into the relationships of male and female. But usually when you put Venus and Mars together, it's like a clash of the masculinity and femininity. The person doesn't really know how to do both. Everybody has to do both, depending on who you're relating to and the need at hand. You can't always just be a woman. Even if you have a woman's body, you can't always act like a woman. Sometimes you have to act like a man. So if you have a chart where the female and the male things are clashing in the chart, then it's going to be hard for you to do the right thing at the right time. You tend to do the wrong thing at the wrong time. Be feminine, feel feminine when it's time to be masculine, feel masculine when it's time to be feminine.
Okay.
So that's like a clash of the Mars and Venus. If you put K2 with some planets, if you put the bigender planets, Saturn, Mercury, and K2 with the strongly gendered planets, it reduces the extremity of a person's gender.
Okay.
Like Mars with K2 would reduce. Well, K2 is unusual. Like, let's say Mercury with Mars. It's going to reduce the extremity of their masculinity, but it's also, now you have to judge like which planet is the one that's better than the other one in this combination. It's not always the same. The combination happens in this sign or that sign. It's different with which planet has more Bala than the other one, which one is higher north or southern. If they get really close, makes a difference. So which one will dominate the other one in the conjunction is very important to figure out. When you have a conjunction of 2 planets, 3 planets, 4 planets, you got to figure out who's the dominant one.
Right.
So let's say if Mercury is dominant and joining with Mars, then you get a person that's mild in their masculinity. But it might not be serve them well all the time, because like I said, there's times when you need to be aggressive or you need to be brave and get something done. Just do it, right? So with a Mercury conjunction with Mars, you might not be able to always do that. Or vice versa, if the Mercury conjunction was with Mars, but Mars is the one that's dominating the conjunction, then you get a person that doesn't know how to be just neutral.
Right.
They always are aggressive. They're always asserting themselves. They're always assertive. They're never just meek.
Right. And what if it's with Venus, Mercury?
Mercury and Venus? Well, that happens to be
Because that's a common
it
conjunction
happens
too.
all the time.
Yes.
Because they have so much in common. So it's good for Venus to be with Mercury, because Venus is a little bit too extreme as a female symbol, and Mars is too extreme as a male.
Right.
But Mercury and Venus, they're just more naturally the same.
Right.
They both deal with beauty and cooperation and relationship.
Okay.
So, whereas Mars and Mercury are just like kind of on different pages. So Mercury's conjunction with Mars doesn't bless Mars too easily, but blesses Venus more easily, because they have more of a like nature.
Right. Okay. Yeah, because Mercury's about that symmetry and Venus is about beauty, so
yeah,
it works. They're
yeah, actually, this also trips people up. But the Vedic, I don't know if they're Vedic, but the Sanskrit books about astrology definitely say that Mercury is the most beautiful planet.
I can see
Everybody
that.
thinks, what? It should be Venus. Venus is very attractive, more attractive than Mercury, but in terms of pure beauty, it's Mercury. And now the way that we think about, like how we scientifically analyze beauty these days, and it's all about the symmetry, the balance. That's why Mercury really gives a perfect balance, a perfect symmetry. And it shows you also that beauty isn't in being extreme. beauty is in finding that right. There's just this right thing, and whatever it is, if it's art or if it's physical beauty or anything, you just got. That's why it's so easy to mess it up.
Yes.
Because it's just this perfect little balance. You get every little thing right, and it just is beautiful. Then you put just a little bit too much or too little of something else, and it just becomes much less beautiful.
No, I agree.
Yeah,
Yes.
Mercury is the delicate one that really gets that balance just right.
Right. Okay.
So in terms of gender, Mercury is fully balanced.
Balance.
Yeah, and Mercury is associated with children. Not newborn infants, but children like school-age children, prepubescent children.
Okay.
So Mercury's nature is before puberty, when there's like an innocence about the gender, and there's like sort of a obliviousness to gender. You know how kids are? This is also culturally different. You know, unless the culture is really telling them you're a girl and you're a boy, then when the kids before they are at puberty, they don't really notice too much that one's a girl and one's a boy.
No.
Yeah. While the puberty is going on, then that's the only thing on their mind. It's not a culturally instilled thing. But previous to the puberty, they don't really care.
No.
A little bit. Girls are girls, boys are boys from the beginning, but it's not so drastic. So Mercury's like that. It's in this, it represents this period where there's not so much of a big difference between the masculinity and the feminine. It's all toned down and balanced. And even in young and youthful and light, take it easy. It's not, be light about everything. Let's be a little bit masculine. Let's be a little bit feminine. Let's put them together in the right balance.
Right. Yes.
Whereas Saturn is also a transgender or a neutral planet. You get it on the other end. Saturn represents old people.
All right. Wouldn't Jupiter kind of be the elderly too?
Elder is Jupiter. Old is Saturn.
Oh, okay, got it.
The Jupiter is like 50 years, 50, 60, maybe 70 years old, where you're just still functioning really well and your mind is really clear and you've got tons of experience.
Golden age.
The golden age, right? You got tons of experience, tons of learning, everything. Boom, that's Jupiter. Saturn, you go on past that.
Okay.
You still have experience and knowledge and wisdom, but you start to get slow, hard, rickety. It doesn't move so well. It gets still all the time. You feel cold. And that's where the Saturn age comes in 70, 80, 90.
I see. Okay.
So also when you get to that age, and most of the people stop caring about whether they're men or women. You don't really find like, it's unusual when you see, wow, look at this 80-year-old man and woman are, even that, it's the friendship that they have.
Seems more friendship.
It's not a romance anymore. It's just not even possible.
At least it seems like friendships. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Saturn is the other end of the spectrum with the gender balance, where Mercury is a very lighthearted, youthful gender balance, which is fun.
Right.
Saturn is this kind of like gender balance and like, it doesn't even matter anymore. I don't even care about it.
Pessimistic.
Yeah, pessimistic. Who cares what gender you are? You're all a bunch of junk, or you're all people.
Falling apart.
Yeah, let's just die and get a new body.
Right, okay.
People also hate the way I talk about Saturn sometimes because I talk about, but I love, I that to me, maybe I can talk about, how it's another thing with race. Like if you're a member of a race, you could tell a racist joke.
Yeah.
It's okay. Or if you're a woman, you could tell like a dumb blonde joke. It's okay. So it's maybe because I'm so Saturn, I have a lot of Saturn in me. So maybe that's why I very easily talk lightly about Saturn's disposition.
But you explained it beautifully last time. It's that it is a planet of negativity, but because there's negativity, then there's that concept of positivity or the goodness.
Right.
That's an extension of, it's again a spectrum. It's not like Saturn's just there by itself, right?
Yeah, if you're the planet of negativity, then you have control over negativity.
Yes.
So that means you can make it something useful.
Useful.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. So let's finish up then. So Saturn is the older gender neutrality. It's kind of like we're tired of gender anymore. Let's move on to something else. Let's move on to some other topic. That's Saturn's type of. So it's almost like a non-sexual planet.
Non-sexual.
Mercury is more, but the thing about Saturn, if you study it also, it has perversion to it, right? Remember how when we did our studies of Saturn, because it's very different than everybody else, it's got like a differentness than others, it gets alienated, so it's perverse. And it's dirty too. Saturn likes dirt. Saturn is not really clean. So it's a good planet for kinkiness, perversion. Saturn like can get into weird things that people think, ew, it's dirty.
Right.
So
and Mercury can go into the flirtatious playfulness,
super
right?
flirty, super playful.
Non-committal.
It's not really, it's not really intense.
Okay.
Saturn can get real intense. But you'll also find that it's a little bit detached. Saturn is a difficult planet sexually. It's like detached but intense and weird.
Okay.
Difficult to understand it and pin it down.
Okay.
And then you have Ketu, which is definitely asexual. It's the asexual planet. Ketu is like celibacy.
Oh, nothing. Okay.
No, it's pulled. What Ketu represents is the consciousness. You can almost say it's fully feminine because it absolutely pulls the consciousness back in.
Yes.
So it could be considered to be the most feminine planet, Ketu, but it's not manifesting it externally. That goes back to what I said before, that you won't find a purely feminine anything in the external world. So the only Ketu is such a spiritual planet. It's pulling everything in, and so it's very inward and feminine. But in terms of how it relates to the external world, it's totally neutered.
Okay. Non-relating.
Non-relating.
Okay. And that's what makes Rahu and Ketu, when you said radical, as one of the key words, right? I mean, they have these external qualities when it should be internal, and then internal when it should be external.
Yeah. What makes them radical too? Like, remember that they're radical. So Ketu will be radical about sexuality. So another effect that you can get with Ketu and sexuality is very fantasy oriented or very psychology oriented.
Okay.
If you like I don't know, you put Ketu with, what if there's a Ketu Mars Venus combination, or a Ketu in the 8th house with maybe Venus, some sexual love, or maybe Mars and Ketu in the 8th house, or some stuff. Ketu with the 8th lord, connect Ketu with the sexuality.
Yes.
And you can get a very psychological sexuality, but again, it means it's not so physically manifest.
Okay.
It's more about the psychology of it.
I see. Okay.
But if it's if Ketu by itself just represents not really being that interested in the physical plane anyway.
Okay.
So I guess we also did the faux pas of blending sexuality and gender, which is like a modern day faux pas, right? So, but again, it's not that they're identical. So it's not like your internal self is identical to your bodily gender, but they're related. And similarly, it's not like your gender and your sexuality are identical, but they're related.
Right. Makes sense.
Okay.
Yes. For next week, can we do section 20? But can I ask you a couple more questions about this before? Yeah. Yes?
Yeah.
Okay. Awesome.
Section 20 is about the primordial compounds, the 5 Mahabhutas, right?
Yes.
We'll do that next week. Are we going to do that in Chicago?
Would we have time? Would you have time to do that?
Of course. We'll be both in the same place at the same time. So let's get us both on the same camera.
Oh, that'll be fun. I'm looking forward.
Great.
I'll probably see you there tomorrow.
Oh my God, no, it'll be longer for me.
Oh yeah, you're coming from Japan. Mine is a 4-hour trip.
All right, wish me luck.
Good luck.
I'm going out into the social world.
Me too. I'll see you there.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you for the class. Bye.